Everyone, and welcome to Cultivating Curiosity. We're going to start with introduction. So I am Kateri Budo. I teach high school math in New Orleans.
Hi, my name is Lizzy Roehm, and I teach high school math in Baton Rouge.
Hi, I'm Viola, and I teach high school math in Chicago.
And I am Oswald. I teach high school social studies in St. Petersburg.
So take a moment to think about your favorite student. ACE 28, maybe you have a favorite practicum student already. My guess is that an adjective that you might use to describe that student is curious. Our favorite students are often the ones who are genuinely interested to learn new things and ask questions and be curious. So we'll be talking in this video about how to tap into and cultivate our students' curiosity. So we begin by centering this practice in the mission of our Catholic schools. Then we'll define this concept of an intellectual virtue and dive into the virtue of curiosity. And lastly, we'll provide some practical ways of cultivating curiosity in your own classrooms. So as Catholic educators, we have an inherent responsibility to not only teach our subject matter, but to teach the child as a whole. We use our faith as the lens through which we teach and see our subject. And we take seriously the belief that education is a divinely entrusted mission to bring our students to reach the fullness of Christian life. So this mission goes beyond getting our students to add and subtract fractions with ease, to seeing how their gifts and talents position them in their own unique way to serve those around them. And so it's through an emphasis on the moral and intellectual virtues that we embark on this divine mission. So the moral virtues are the virtues that dispose us to the well-being of another, whereas the intellectual virtues are more specifically a disposition to the pursuit of epistemic goods, such as truth and knowledge. And these intellectual virtues have two main components. The first is the motivational component, so being motivated to pursue that good. And the second is the characteristic activity that presents that motivation. So being curious, asking why, seeking to know just one more thing about the things that we're interested in. And so now you're going to hear from Lizzy about why we chose to focus on the virtue of curiosity.
There are many intellectual virtues. As you can see on our slide, integrity, humility, the love of truth, and responsibility are different intellectual virtues that we have. But we are specifically choosing to talk about curiosity. Intellectual curiosity allows students to access the other intellectual virtues. So especially in a time-sensitive school year and in the lives of busy teachers, curiosity kind of provides this bang for your buck for teachers to access many intellectual virtues. Throughout history, we've seen many philosophers and psychologists try to define curiosity. Descartes defines curiosity as the desire to understand. Hume considered it the love of truth and the source of all our inquiries. And Hobbes even considered it the desire to know why and how. For our presentation, we're going to define curiosity as the intrinsic desire to know one more thing about what we encounter. Our virtuously curious students seek truth and knowledge through inquiry about the world around them. So we know that students want to know one more thing about a topic, which leads them to ask more questions. And we see this continuous cycle to seek and gain knowledge within our students.
Curiosity in the classroom. We cultivate curiosity through intrinsic motivation with our students. When students are curious, they become autonomous, bringing dignity to the traditional roles of teacher and student. Curiosity promotes the mindset of lifelong learning. In our content areas, intellectual curiosity might look a little bit different. In science, we seek explanation for the phenomenon observed in our world around us. In math classrooms, we recognize patterns and we find out rules about general. Social studies, we ask about compelling questions and make connections to different eras. In religion, is focused more on the existential.
So while we provided different definitions of curiosity from different philosophers, we'd like to talk about how curiosity isn't just this vague ideal that can't be quantified. In fact, curiosity has been operationalized and psychologists have given it different characteristics that we can quantify. So there are 3 scales that we use: the need for cognition, the typical intellectual engagement, and the epistemic curiosity scale. Now, all 3 of these scales measure curiosity, and they've been found to be interrelated. And because we can measure and quantify curiosity, we can then work to cultivate this specific trait within our classrooms. So researchers established that phronesis, which is the practical wisdom to use particular skills or virtues, is necessary to manifest curiosity within our classroom. And this language of phronesis kind of echoes psychologists' rhetoric about metacognition, which are all of the mental processes related to thinking and knowledge. Now, metacognition manages knowing a skill and then knowing how and why to flexibly apply this skill. So with this in mind, teachers must use metacognition to manifest curiosity in the classroom. Teachers need to teach metacognition so that we can then see curiosity. And because metacognition can be grown and changed over time, curiosity can be cultivated and grown over time. Finally, we'd like to talk about 3 different types of metacognition. We have planning, monitoring and controlling, and then evaluating. So in the planning stage, this is before the student has done anything. They think ahead about how maybe they might approach a math problem, or they start to outline how they would go about writing a paper. Then in the monitoring and controlling process, this is actually while you're doing the physical work, while you are solving the math problem or writing the paper. Students might ask themselves, am I following the process that I wanted to? Am I using this structure that my teacher has taught me, like with fidelity and in a complete way? And then there's the evaluation process. So this is after you've completed the activity, you have finished writing the paper, or you have solved the math problem. And the student begins to reflect and look back on the process. They might ask themselves, did I do this correctly? Was this easy for me? Do I have any questions about what I've just done? It's this moment to be self-reflective and to self-evaluate on what has just happened. Now, we need all 3 of these phases in harmony to best support students. So it's the job of the teacher to help students with the planning, monitoring, and controlling and evaluative aspects of metacognition. Now you're going to hear from Catherine and Joey to discuss some practical ways to cultivate curiosity in the classroom.
We cultivate curiosity through metacognition in our students. So we're going to walk through some of the teaching practices that you can use in your classroom to support metacognition with your students. We will focus on promoting student inquiry, teacher and student talk alouds, and journaling and self-reflection.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'll take the first 2 here. So first, when we're talking about student inquiry, inquiry just being questioning, there are kind of 2 approaches or phases that we can think of. First, from a planning perspective, when we talk about planned inquiry, we often talk about creating a unit-wide compelling question. Now, I use the phrase compelling question. What do I mean? A compelling question is one that is both relatable to students. So it's not written in high academic language or something that would probably not interest students. We have to make it approachable for them. But at the same time, we balance that with the question needs to address the academic content and skills that we're trying to teach. So in writing a key question like this, we can then throughout the unit weave this question into our lessons. So each lesson can break off a small chunk of this question, this compelling question, and try to look at it from different perspectives or come to a more full understanding. A second way we can kind of plan inquiry into our lessons and units is by planning different types of questions. And I'll explain more about that in a little bit. Now, The other side of the coin here is reacting to student questions. So when students have questions, what's the best way to respond? One common practice that's really good is to flip the question back onto the student, or if that student might not quite be capable, onto the class as a whole. This forces the thinking onto the students, which is what we always want to be finding ways to do. Another practice is to explicitly make connections between this question that the student has asked and other questions or concepts that we're discussing. So let's say Mackenzie has a question. First, I'm going to acknowledge, say, hey, Mackenzie, that's a great question. That reminds me of something that Adam said a few minutes ago about, etc. In that way, we both validate what our students are saying, and we remind and kind of pull in other students and tell them, hey, I'm listening to you, I care, and I force thinking onto multiple students at once. So when we look at kind of these two aspects here, both the planned and the more impromptu reacting to students, there are a couple key similarities we want to draw out for you. Okay. So first is that unless the question is well beyond the level of the student, we want to flip the thinking back onto the student, make them think. The second is we want to try to find approaches that weave questioning throughout our unit. Okay, it shouldn't be that we have DI for 10 minutes and then we start talking about questions. Questions should drive everything. As the late great Mark Johnson said, telling is not teaching. Now, I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about different types of questions. So first, when we talk about asking students questions, we need to keep in mind they bring certain knowledge and certain schema to the table ahead of time. This is our prior knowledge. The first type of question we often ask is a recall-based question. So what do you remember about this? Where are you at currently? Then we can, from there, branch off in many different directions. Maybe we have them brainstorm a concept and what they know about a concept, what they guess might perhaps be related to it. Or maybe we ask them to look at a piece of text or a video or something and paraphrase the information that they're receiving into their own language, force them to really think, okay, what's going on here? A third type of question might be tracing the consequences, so perhaps from cause to effect of a particular event or series of events. And finally, the final type of question is one which connects different ideas or concepts. So if we're talking about at a very simple level, perhaps how are addition and subtraction related? Or at a more complex level, how are derivatives and integrals related? Are they inverses of each other or not, etc. The second major practice we're going to talk about are talk alouds. So a talk aloud is when you're working through a process verbally, okay, you're narrating your thinking. Now, I want to emphasize that it's not just, okay, here's step one, here's step two, etc. We also want to highlight the things we're paying attention to while we're following a certain step. Maybe the complexities we watch out for, or issues that commonly occur. What we don't want to do, though, is make a kind of stream of consciousness. So we don't want to just narrate everything that's in our heads, because of course that's a little overwhelming for students. Instead, we want to give the relevant considerations. So we have a plan in mind ahead of time about what we should cover and what complexities or complications we should highlight for students. The reasoning behind all of this is that when we explicitly talk through our mental process, then we're modeling for students how they might think about the issue. To wrap us up, Catherine's going to talk about the third practice.
Our third practice is journaling and self-reflection. For students, An example of this is annotated reading, where they're writing and highlighting as they go. Generating questions, where they can generate questions as they are learning or at the end of a unit. Written recall, to recall at the end of a unit or during a unit or for checks for understanding. And self-assessment, providing autonomy for students to understand their learning and where they need to work. For teachers, a teacher model might be, when I read a text for the first time, these are strategies that I use so that students can understand that teachers use these metacognitive strategies too. We can also explain the value of metacognitive activity to our students by providing data or statistics and just explaining why these things work. We can provide time in class to think and talk about learning. This is not taking away from content area, but rather developing the foundation needed for that content to stick and develop later. Lastly, encouraging independent learning for our students. Again, this creates autonomy. They're able to self-reflect on their own learning and move forward on their own without us. Examples of these things might be reading with a pen in hand. Again, a student might be learning how to read with a pen in hand for the first time. Teachers can model how they might do that as they go through a paragraph or even a given section of text. A log of questions can be done during learning. So throughout a homework assignment, or perhaps while reading a text, they have a separate log of questions that they can ask. Or this could be something that happens all at once at the end of a unit to review before moving on to assessment and the next unit. A KWL chart, or a know, want to know, and learn chart, is a wonderful metacognitive strategy to work on self-reflection as well as journaling. So we talk about the things that we already know, where we're going with what we want to know, and looking back on what we've already learned. A brain dump can be something that happens at the end of a unit before we move on to the assessment. It's a way for them to know all the things that they know before just jumping into studying and looking at things already given to them. They're able to pull from their recall, and that is a strategy in and of itself. A learning survey, lastly, is a way for students and teachers to check in with one another to know where they are in their learning, and not just an assessment in the traditional sense. We thank you for joining us. Again, we are Kateri, Joey, Lizzy, and Catherine. Our contact information is here, and we look forward to seeing you guys in our Q&A session.